Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, NAV Skills webinar. Today is going to be PowerShell 101 with Waldo, also known as Erik Wouters. My name is Daniel Rimmelsman. We both work for Cloud Ready Software. And today's PowerShell demonstration will be about the basics. So none of that expert stuff. We're going to start at the beginning, and I'll let Waldo take it from here. Waldo?
Hello, and hi from me, and very much good luck from me as well. As Daniel said, this is going to be an introduction on PowerShell, but I will try to also go a little bit further than just an introduction to get you going, to get you having some ideas on how to make your life a little bit easier by working with PowerShell. There is a lot of audio in this slide. Okay. As an introduction, where in the NAV universe are we? Obviously, when talking about PowerShell, well, we are in the tooling universe, and we know a lot of tools probably, and this is probably the tool that you will be using or are using at the most at this moment, which is the Object Designer. But we obviously also have like a report builder or a Visual Studio, and probably a lot of you know this as well, but this is the merge tool from Per Mogensen, which has been used and probably a lot of people are still using as a tool and tooling around NAV. The administration console, and since latest versions, Visual Studio Code is becoming more and more a tool that are very useful in the surroundings, or at least in the NAV universe. Now, that's a lot of tooling. And basically, where does PowerShell fit in? Well, PowerShell fits in about all the areas the other tools are fitting in at the moment. It can help us with development. It can help us with server administration, with object management, and actually with a lot more. So if you ask anyone, like, is PowerShell useful for you? Probably it is. And even if you're not a system administrator or a developer, probably PowerShell can still be useful for you. So why is it important? Not only Microsoft says it's important, Microsoft does say it's important, but yeah, you just have to accept the fact that not everything can be done with the GUI anymore, because you can do a lot. And if you need a button for every single thing that you want to do, then progress will not progress that fast anymore. So you just have to accept that sometimes to automate stuff, you might want to go back to a non-GUI solution. So let's get started on this PowerShell thing. What is so powerful on PowerShell? Well, first of all, when you think about a shell, you probably think about going back to DOS ages. Well, it's not really that. PowerShell is quite powerful. It uses the .NET framework. It is object-oriented. So basically, you have it is much more than just a DOS scripting language. It is still scripting language, but yeah. It is able to hook in about everything you want to hook in with your scripting language, while DOS was not really able to do that. Now, it uses tools, and this is probably the one tool that you think about when you heard or hear the word shell, which is basically, yeah, the Windows PowerShell. This is where it all starts. If you want to do ad hoc stuff, you want to do like quick checks or whatever, or quick things, this is probably the tool that you will be using, the Windows PowerShell. But when you start scripting, you need some kind of code editor, and that's where the PowerShell ISE comes into play. A tool, yeah, basically I created to create scripts. It is an integrated scripting environment. That's where ISE stands for. So it's multi-line. You can save scripts. You can like have a debugger. There is IntelliSense, snippets, even basically a lot what you would expect from a decent code editor. Now, when you talk about code editors, and lately, at least in the last year, Visual Studio Code has come up as a very popular code editor, and that's also for PowerShell. So with Visual Studio Code, you can do quite the same things as with the ISE, but you see there is a lot of progress with Visual Studio Code. And the one thing I like most is the fact that it has got a default Git integration. So that means PowerShell scripts can just integrate it with Git. And I do my scripts and basically my scripts and my modules are being edited by Visual Studio Code now. And one reason was this Git integration. Okay, so let me quickly show you these tools. So any Windows installation has PowerShell with it. So you do not have one reason to not use PowerShell because it's already there. Except for Daniel, who uses a Mac, but anyway. So PowerShell is there, I said, and I showed you 3 tools. One tool is the Windows PowerShell, which is the most basic shell kind of thing where you want to do some ad hoc stuff. The one once you open the run space, now I opened a run space, basically now a piece of memory that is serving for me where I can load stuff and execute stuff. So I can execute stuff like get service, which gets me the services. This is obviously a much more readable list of services instead of going to start, type services, and go to the services like that. You don't like this view, do you? You are all developers, so you should like this more. No, I'm just joking, obviously. But to get a quick overview of stuff, to simply like use set service and restart something, for instance, this is something that you can do with this tool. We will go over some commandlets in a minute. The second tool that I talked about was the PowerShell ISE. So this is this one, the integrated scripting environment. And you see here already that there is some kind of code editor. And this is where I can start scripting. And you see there is IntelliSense. For a NAV developer, this is, we appreciate it most, I think. There is still the console, so I can do some ad hoc stuff here as well and test out and all these kind of things. There are some tools to help you, like on the right, as you see the comment add-in, to help me find comments and work with comments. Or how PowerShell, the PowerShell naming is commandlets. So this get service thing, I can find it here. Or let's find anything I can do with services, like get the service or even set service, start service, or stop service, these kind of things. So I can get to commandlets I'm not really familiar with. And let's just say I want to start a service. Let me just show the details. Here you can see what I can do. What parameters do I need to provide? Like I need an input object. And in this parameter set, I would have a name, like Explorer or whatever. So that is a tool within this environment, the ISE environment, that I can use. There are multiple tools. This is one of them. I've got snippets as well. If I press Ctrl-J, or edit, I think it is, and then start snippets, you see that there are a bunch of snippets. With the one I like most is the function snippet, the complete function snippet, which helps me to write a function for PowerShell. Just a snippet. I can now start and replace all these codes that it just has provided there for me. It has got a debugger. I can put breakpoints and debug my code. It will go and debug if you have your code in multiple files and stuff like that. So it's pretty advanced. What you expect from a code editor you have here in your PowerShell ISE environment. Last but not least is Visual Studio Code. You have probably seen this, and let me just close this one. You have seen this tool probably in the context of the new AL development that we will be having in a few months. Well, this same environment you can use for PowerShell as well. And all I did is just installed a PowerShell extension. This PowerShell extension is the one from Microsoft, and it is really a very advanced, a very good extension. And you see, if I follow this up as well, so I get notifications for every new release that there is for this extension, and you see a lot of efforts that Microsoft is putting into this extension. It's starting to make a lot of sense to do PowerShell purely in Visual Studio Code. Yeah, how do you do that? Well, basically you create a new file, you change language mode to PowerShell, and basically I can now start writing PowerShell. And there was my IntelliSense, there was my get service. I can basically execute it quite the same way as I would have been executing this with PowerShell ISE. I've got my IntelliSense, I've got my debugger, I've got my console here, so this is quite the same. Plus now I have got Git Integration, which makes me very easily save my scripts or my functions to source control. It makes a lot of sense. So those tools we will be using for doing PowerShell. Now, before we are doing PowerShell, we need to know some fundamentals. PowerShell is a scripting language. So we will be automating and we will be creating scripts. You can compare scripts with batch files, but let's not. Scripts for PowerShell is a little bit more powerful. It's not called a .bat file. We will call it mainly a .ps1 file, a PowerShell scripting file. And yeah, you can execute that, and the code in the scripting file will be executed. As simple as that. The code that we will be writing is mainly based on commandlets. A commandlet is a verb and a noun, like get, process, the verb get and the noun process. So get usually means get me information of something, the noun process. It can be another verb like stop. So in this case, in a stop process, I would stop some kind of process. Yeah. So you can either make PowerShell do something or get you information of something. Now, one of the very powerful things about PowerShell is the fact that it is object-oriented. Basically, it works with objects. Everything that you get, all the information that you get, are objects or a collection of objects. And obviously, objects or a collection of objects, you can start looping, right? And this is basically the scripting that we will be doing, looping information and then executing other stuff based on this information. That's what coding is all about, probably. Now, it is extendable as well. So you can write your own modules for PowerShell or use modules that are already available online that are based on top of PowerShell. And you can already imagine what Microsoft did. Microsoft, the NAV team of Microsoft, they built their own modules for PowerShell. So here it is called snap-ins. I usually call it modules, and in the community it's called basically modules as well. So I really don't understand why I've put snap-ins here. But Microsoft created 4 modules. We will go into that a little further in a minute. Another fundamental thing in PowerShell is the piping and the pipelining. And it's actually the same. So using the pipe symbol. I'm not going to tell too much here about that, but the pipe symbol is quite important. And this is something you probably, if you're not used to that, you need to get used to that. You can live without a pipe, but you make your scripts and your code so much more powerful and performant by using the pipe symbol. When you're used to that, it's really a very convenient way to write code, PowerShell code. And then, yeah, formatting features. You will see what I mean with that when we go into the examples. Now, as said, Microsoft created modules, created 4 modules, being the management module, the apps management module, apps tools module, and the model tools. Now, let me try to give you an overview just by going into code. Now, I will be doing the demos with PowerShell ISE. Basically because that's the default program that opens my scripts and that makes my life a little bit easier. Now, the first thing that you should do when you're doing anything in PowerShell ISE or you start scripting for NAV, you should load the modules of NAV. Now, probably if you already are using like the basic things of PowerShell for NAV, then you're probably using these shortcuts like the administration shell or the development shell. And what these shortcuts actually do is they open a Windows PowerShell window, so like this one. So I'm not able to create script in this one, but this tool accepts shortcuts, and that is actually what this does as well. So there is a shortcut executing a script that already loads your module. So let me quickly show you that. If I open the file location and I open this shortcut, you will see that basically a default Windows PowerShell tool is loaded, .powershell.exe, and there are some shortcuts or parameters, sorry. So there is execution policy, remote sign, but this is the most important one. There is a file, the PS1 file. Remember, this is the script file, the batch file on steroids, let's say. And this script contains code to load the module. So it is doing stuff for us. If I do this, it already loads the module, and I'm able to execute whatever commandlet I want to execute from for NAV. The PowerShell ISE is not able to do that. So if I want to use NAV commandlets, I need to load these modules manually. So this is most basic thing to do that. You can create shortcuts within PowerShell ISE, but that would take us a little bit too far. So what I did here, I used the import module commandlet and refer to some kind of script where Microsoft basically is loading the module. Now, for the NAV admin tool, there is a NAV admin tool PS1. For the model tools, there is model tools PSD1, and apps tools, there is apps tool PSD1. You see here I have 3 lines, while Microsoft has got 4 modules. Well, this script is going to load the administration or the management commandlets for both the server administration, but also for the apps, so for extensions. Basically, this one is going to load 2 modules. If I execute this one, F8, with F8 I run a selection. So I only run the code that I selected. F8, I will be pressing F8 quite a lot during this webcast, by the way. So now you can see here almost what you have loaded. Well, that is what the standard script is actually showing you, but you should actually just be able to get to that yourself. With the get modules, you see which modules are currently loaded in your run space. So by running this, I already loaded the Microsoft Dynamics NAV Apps Management, Apps Tools, Management, and Model Tools. With the get command, you get the commandlets that are running or actually available from a certain module. So let's turn it a little bit around. I know that I now loaded these modules in PowerShell, but let's get to the commands. So get me the commands from these modules, from all the Microsoft Dynamics NAV star, so all these modules. Let's execute this one. So here you can see all the commandlets that Microsoft has provided for us to be able to use within PowerShell and do something with your nav. Can be a lot. Yeah. If you have a quick overview, you see here, for instance, the verbs, and this all this automatically sorted on the verbs. You see that I can get information about quite a lot. Like I get information on add-ins. I can get information on the server user or server instance or web service. So let us try that. Let's get nav server instance. This one is quite important. This is what we will be using quite a lot. This gives you all the web server or all the server instances installed on this machine. If I execute this, you see here I've got the default instance, and I already have got an extra instance here, nav skills webcast. So I've got 2 server instances. Let's check if this is correct. This seems to be correct. And by the way, using the administration console is not actually the way to show how if it is correct, yes or no. I mean, this tool, the administration console, is basically built on top of PowerShell. So it should be the other way around. If this tool shows 2 instances, you should check in PowerShell whether that is correct instead of checking the other way around. And I can prove you to that. There is a PowerShell history here. And if you execute that, you'll see that actually by opening this tool, I actually already executed this commandlet. And you see this is the same get nav server instance commandlet that I've used here. Yeah, only represented as an XML. Let's go further and let's see what I prepared here. So there are other commandlets that we can use in regards of NAV, like the server configuration. Let's execute this line, and you see, get me the server configuration of this server instance, the nav skills webcast. And you see here, probably you recognize this kind of, because these are all the keys that you find in your server config XML. So here you can find, for instance, which database it is connected to, or which server this database is, or which ports is configured. Basically, this is the representation of what we can find in the console here as well, and is represented here in this GUI. Yeah. So with PowerShell, you can get to that information as well. Company. I can do stuff with companies, like get me all the companies of this server instance, or create me a new company. You see, there is not really a verb. New is not a verb, but you kind of know what will happen here. If I use new nav company, probably it's going to create a new company. So in this case, I'm going to create a new company called Waldo. I can create companies with PowerShell. How cool is that? So if I just get the information on the companies again, you'll see that now I have 2 companies. And I can even copy companies. Like if you have a company default, whatever template company, and you want to copy that, you have the copy nav company for server instance nav skills webcast. Never typed URL webcast. And then I want to copy Waldo maybe to destination Waldo 2. Now it's copying that company. So let me check here again. Now I've got 3 companies. How cool is that? And obviously when you are able to create something, you are able to remove something. And let me give that as a tip as well. If you are creating your own functions to create something, then please create also a function to delete that same something. Because there is no something there is not something like a rollback. If there is an error, everything that was executed is already committed. There is no rollback kind of thing, no transaction kind of thing in PowerShell. Yeah. Okay. Next. Yeah, I can do a lot. Like I get the information on the permission sets, get the server sessions, nobody is logged in at the moment, or even do something like set nav server instance restart. In this case, I'm going to restart the default instance. Yeah, even quick enough. I can show you here. Was not quick enough. Okay, let me do it again. And now you should be able to see here that it was restarting. On the web service part, like give me all the web services that are published on NavScale Webcast, and you see here the web services. Yeah, I think you kind of know what the idea is here. You can do quite a lot with all this. If you know, if you want, for instance, to know everything you can do with apps, and then we're talking extensions, well then there is the get command still, and the right filter can give you all the commandlets on the apps. Now I would like to go a little bit deeper in working with objects and working with deltas a little bit, just a little bit. Because this is, I think, for the developer, one of the most important things to do, like work with your objects. Or you can do a lot with that. You can upgrade. You can organize your source control. You can do a lot. Basically, you're a developer. You work with objects. You might want to do stuff with objects. I do, for instance, my release management with it, which basically means like setting the date, setting the time, resetting the modified flag, and updating the version list. And this is all done with PowerShell. Yeah. So let me go over some basic stuff, like preparing. Yeah, that's important. First of all, I'm going to reset everything, and I need a working folder, because when you work with objects, you're going to export objects. If you export objects, you're going to want to save it somewhere. That's my working folder. So there is some working folder here. I can actually show you that. Start working folder, and here you go. It is empty. That's good. First thing you do, we can do is export. So with the export nav application object, I'm basically able to export objects. In this case, I provide a filter, and the filter, I basically want to export all the job queue objects. Let us do that. I execute this one. It has created, I called original.txt. You'll see in a second why I called it like that. And you see here a text file, which you probably will recognize of the objects that I see here. Now just imagine that you can automate this, and do this every night, or after you did something, or after you logged off, or whatever, in an automated event. Another thing that you might do a lot is split. Well, splitting is just out of the box available. So I can split this original file, and let me show you. I've got now here all these job queue objects as a splitted, in a splitted way. Yeah. Now, one very interesting thing here is you can get information out of these objects as well. Like there is a get. Get is always information, by the way. So get nav application object property is a command that gets you basically information about object properties, and I refer to a source. Now this source needs to be an exported file or a collection of exported files. So in this case, I refer to my split folder, and you see here that I get back a list of all the objects that are in there with their object properties. Like what is the object type, what is the ID, version list. Remember that when we release, we might want to update this version list. The date, the time, and modified flag. If we have a get nav application object property, we might have a set application object property as well, and here you have it. Yeah. So with this command, that we might we are able to set all these properties. Again, quite cool, and you can do quite a lot with that. Now let's do some developments. Let's open the development environment of this database. Should be the NAV skills. Yeah, that's this one. And what I did, I exported the job queue thing like this. And let's just do a very basic thing like adding a field, Waldo field, which is Boolean. See, I'm not very creative. And I would like to have that on the page probably. Probably not, but let's see if we can manage that. There is my field, and we put it on the page. Probably not there, but there seems to be a good idea. Okay, let's save this as well, and maybe we need to add some code. Like in this case, we want to add some code, maybe in a documentation trigger, or maybe in here after the commit. Okay, we changed 3 objects. Let's create a delta now. So when we did some changes, probably we can create deltas as well. In order to do that, we need to compare. Now I'm lucky because I already exported the original. Yeah. If you are planning to work with deltas, please do not forget this one. This original is quite important because this is going to make sure that you will have the delta, and the delta will describe exactly what you did. If you have a wrong original file, you will have a wrong delta file. Yeah, probably the modified file is the current status of the object. That will always be okay. That's never a problem. That's basically in the database, in whatever database you want to get a delta from. It's this original you need to think of. This needs to be the exact one to describe your changes. You need a decent release management to be able to decently work with delta files. Yeah. But as you see, I now already have this original, so what I can do now, I will create a modified. Basically, I will export the exact same objects, the exact same filter, basically, to a different file. And just for the sport, I'm going to split it as well. And I will use the compare nav application object to create a delta file. Let us do that. And I can do that because I've got the 2 versions. And now it says here, okay, I found 15 objects, and 3 of them you have changed. Let me show you this. Let me show you this. I want to have a compare result. Well, I didn't really prepare this, so I hope this will be okay. If I use the pass through, which basically forces this commandlet to pass through the actual object that has been created during execution of this commandlet, maybe I can use this variable to do stuff. So let's do stuff. Let's do this exact compare again. And it will create the same delta, because now I've got the output here in my compare result. And you will see that I have, for all these 15 objects, I can see that code unit 449 has a delta, table 472 has a delta, and page 672. So in PowerShell, I am aware which exact files, objects, have been changed. I can do stuff with that. This result is basically, as I said, an object or a collection of objects. In this case, clearly a collection of 15 objects, which I can loop, I can filter, I can do stuff. If I, for instance, want to set some properties, I can use this one, at least the set version of this application object properties, and refer to all the objects that I just got back in this result. Okay, maybe we're taking a little bit too far, so let's go a little bit back and look at our deltas that we just created. And as you can see, the deltas that we have found in our result, we find here as a file as well. And they should describe exactly what I changed. Yeah? So I added some code here, and I added some code here. Yeah? I added an insertion of a field, in this case, or in the table, insertion of the field in the table. Cool. So I've been doing stuff with my objects. I've got my original, I split it, I've got my modified, I split it as well. Now I've compared these two, created delta files, described it. Yeah. Now, these are my changes, my objects are here. The nice thing about deltas is that you can create reverse deltas as well. So let's go a little bit more complex. Reverse deltas are the exact opposite of a normal delta. So while this one described, for instance in the table, an insertion of this field, the opposite delta would describe a deletion of this field. Yeah? So if this code unit describes an insertion of some code, the opposite delta will have a deletion of the code, and or a code modification where the original code is with the some code and the modified code is without it. Yeah. So let's see if we can create something like that, and obviously we can't. So I'm going to create a new folder to be able to install, or at least I will save my deltas here, my new reverse deltas here. And oops, it is this one, reverse deltas. Basically, you do the same. So you compare again, but you switch to modified and original. Yeah. So the original path is going to be the modified object, and the modified path is going to be the original object. If we do this, execute, and let's execute all these 4 lines, you'll see you still have 3 changed objects. And let's have a look at these deltas. Now I have a deletion of this field. And now I have a deletion of this field in the page. And here I have the some code in the original code and nothing in a modified code. So this now does make sense. But why would I use it? Well, this is very useful for removing your developments. Why not? I mean, if I just want to remove one specific piece that I was able to get a delta from, just think of source control management, that you're able to create a delta for a certain change that you did. Well, why not create a delta for the exact opposite as well? So if you want to reverse any change, you always have the delta to reverse this specific change. Yeah. How do you do that? Well, applying a delta is done with update NAVApplicationObject. Basically, what you will do is you refer to the target, like I want to apply a delta to these objects. The delta path is this one, so these are the deltas that I want to apply, and the result should be saved in some other folder. So PowerShell is never going to overwrite files. You will always create new files. So let's do that. I will do that now, and let's do this, or let's have a look. So now I have here objects that basically are again my original, or should be my original objects. Let's prove that. And we have an import nav application object as well. Let's do that. So now I'm importing the object back into this environment. And you will see that it is done now. And in this, you see, I don't have this Waldo field anymore. So it removed the Waldo field and still kept all the other fields. Now, all of these are uncompiled, and with PowerShell, luckily, we can compile as well. In this case, I'm compiling all the uncompiled objects. And you see, they are now compiled again. So basically, I restored my environment in the original state. Okay, so this was merely to show you what you can do with objects, and you can do a lot more. But basically it comes down, you can export, import, and compile. That's the most basic thing. On top of that, you can work with deltas, and on top of that, you can work with reverse deltas. Yeah? And if you combine this in some kind of source control system, this might become quite powerful. All right. So I must say, the first time that I saw all these commandlets, I got this kind of picture, like, oh my, what is this? How do I start with that? Well, basically, you always have to, you should not forget these categories. If you are able, if you want to have some help on development and automate some parts of development, probably PowerShell can help you with that. For security, for upgrades, for company management, for server administration, and probably things that are not on this list as well. Yeah. Now, one of the more important things and more powerful things in PowerShell is also the pipe symbol. I already mentioned that. So we have seen now a bunch of commandlets. Well, let's use them with a pipe symbol. So let's pipe. And I can explain best by just showing that. So as I said already, if you get information, you get an object. In this case, I get two objects, right? I've got the object of the Dynamics NAV 100. I get the object of the NAV Skills Webcast, two objects. Well, let's just assume that we don't like this output. And to be honest, I don't like this output. So what I like a lot is format this output. So I already jumped to this output transformation. So if I do get nav server instance, and I want to format this, which I used most is table, and then auto size, you see that I get a table. I like this a lot more. Now the thing is, so yeah, first of all, what happened here? I used a pipeline. This pipeline basically is going to give you the output of the far right commandlet. Yeah, so it is going to output the far right commandlet, so the format table. So what I know, okay, it will show me a table, but of what? Well, whatever I input. Yeah, and the one thing that is left from the pipeline is the input from whatever is right from the pipeline. This is basically the most simple thing on how to explain the pipeline. So you have to read from left to right, yeah, and reason like, okay, this is the left is always going to be the input from that, and you can continue like, this is input for that, which might be an input from another, which might be an input for another, which might be an input from another. Yeah. So let's combine this a little bit. Like, we probably want to manipulate some objects as well. Like if you do a get service, right? You get a lot of services. Maybe I want to count these. And that would already be a piping thing. So if I want to count all these services, I can either do that manually, but let's not do that. I can pipe this into a measure command. Measure is basically a measure object, which is taking this as input and in this case execute something like measuring. So I've got 210 services. Yeah, so this should be the measure thing. Now I might want to filter as well. Like in this case, I've got a lot of running services, I've got a lot of stop services. Maybe I'm already only interested in the running services, right? So if I pipe this into a where object, what I like a lot is just using the where, which is an alias for where object. Where, and now I have to refer to some kind of property. Now the property is status. So where status equals running. and if I execute this one, I only get running. Now, how many have I running? Maybe I can pipe that again into the measure. And you see I've got 95 running services. And this is how piping works. So get me all the services, filter them on running, and then measure them. And that's the output that I want. The far right is the output that you want. You will end up in situations where you have like 7, 8, 10, maybe 15 pipelines. That can happen. Yeah. Now another one that I like a lot is the select. So let's go back to this get enough server instance. And you will see here, if I format that to a table, yeah, okay, I made it quite big, but if I format this to a table, maybe I'm not interested in all these properties. With the select, I can select certain properties. So let's just select display name and state, maybe, and then format as a table. And now you get only two properties. To sort is easy. I'm not going to show you that, but that's for sorting your output. Mainly important if you really have a lot of output. One thing that I want to show you as well is the out grid view. So this is always interesting. If you, for instance, get enough server permission set, or maybe even permissions from a certain server instance. Let's take this Dynamics NAV 100. This is something that takes long because there are a lot of permissions in a database. Well, if you put that, for instance, into an out grid view, which I like a lot, then you get a grid view of all these things. And in the grid view, you can filter, you can sort on these columns and stuff like that. It still takes a while to fill this grid view, and especially for this amount of data that you want to put into that. But the grid views sometimes help you, especially in ad hoc stuff, to get something done. Now let's combine this pipeline with some more nav commandlets. So what I like a lot is invoke code units. Invoke nav code unit. Guess what? It invokes a code unit. So when you, for instance, create a code unit that runs, I'm just going to create a run, and I'm going to message here running %1 in company name. For instance, something like that, 50,000 test Waldo. So let me assume I want to execute that code unit. Well, I can. I only need to provide the server instance. I actually don't know where I have the nav skills. Webcast. I need the code unit, probably code unit 50,000, and let's just execute this. And you see already something running something. Yeah, well, I need to provide a company name as well. Now let's use this with pipelining. Basically, let's do something more. Let's call this code unit for all server instances for all companies, and I can do that simple. I should be able to do that simple, like get nav server instance, get me all the server instances. You know, I've got 2 server instances. There are companies on both of them. So let me show all the companies, because I want to run this code unit in all these companies. Get nav company. So now I get all the companies from all these server instances. You see the 2 companies that I created, and probably this is then from the other server instance. So what I should be able to do now is invoke a code unit for all these companies. So this is how powerful the pipeline can be. With one simple line, I'm executing basically in a whole lot of companies a certain code unit to whatever, to like update some data or whatever. yeah, clean up or whatever. If I execute this, you will see that it works, which is kind of like interesting because it shouldn't. Okay, I might have fixed this already. If you have a problem, let me check why it works. Because I foreseen this. What you should be able to do is this, and that doesn't work. Now I need to provide my server instance, but you could reason like, okay, you have a server instance because this object has got a server instance. I can only get companies from a certain server instance. Well, it doesn't. And this actually is not a very perfect commandlet that comes out of the box. And I can show you that, and that's another pipeline example. When we have something that you will use a lot, when you want to figure out what the exact object is that you're getting back, you can use the getMember commandlet, and here is an overview of the object that you get back. And you see here I only have two properties. I've got the company name and I've got the evaluation company, which I think it's Boolean, which is not good. This object does not contain a server instance and should contain a server instance. Yeah. So important to know. First of all, this does not block you. These kinds of things does not block you. Yeah. There are other things that are not ideal, like get nav server configuration. Get nav server configuration. Remember, this is your server settings file, your config file of your server settings. Well, sorry, I cannot type and talk in one go. This one looks like everything is fine, and it looks like it's got the key and the value property. But if you get the members out of this one, you will see it doesn't. It actually does not have one property, just a count. And this is weird. This is actually, you cannot do anything. You cannot filter. If you want to get to whatever property is in here, whatever, if you want to get to the ports, you need to do some crazy stuff to do that. And I really mean crazy stuff. This is nothing logical. What you should be able to do is like filter the key on client services port and then get to the value. You cannot. You cannot with this commandlet. I'm not going to go too deep into that because time does not permit, but there are solutions. And I'm going to skip this one because basically time does not permit. What I would like to show you is there are modules out there. The module that I've been working on is a cloud-ready software module, which is just there for free on GitHub. On github.com/Waldo1001, and it contains a little bit more than 100 functions that makes your life a little bit more easier on top of nav commandlets. Yeah, and let me quickly show you. You can install this easily by downloading it from the Git, Git, or by simply execute this if you have connection to the PowerShell gallery. Yeah, every Windows 10 machine or Windows Server 2016 machine is always connected to the PowerShell gallery, and that means that you can simply execute this commandlet, find module where authors Waldo, or name cloud-ready software, and then install module, and install the module. Very simple. Yeah. And what I'd like to show you is the solution for this. So if you install this module, you can have this get. Sorry, I can actually just use what I have already here. I've got a get nav company 2. The number 2 is usually the fix for number 1. And you see here that I do have a server instance. So while the original one does not have a server instance in the object, this one does have a server instance in the object. So executing this is again possible. And you see an error message because code unit 50,000 does not exist in the other server instance, but it does exist in enough skills server instance. So this is fine. Yeah. So what does these also contain? Well, you know the get command. We already handled that. And with here, you can see a lot of functions that comes with that module, of those modules. Yeah. Let me quickly run through a few of them. This one I really like, import NAV modules. Remember that every time we open the ISE, we need to execute this one. Well, in a module, there's a function that someone from the community added in my modules. Import NAV modules is basically just going to import NAV modules. It will figure out what NAV you installed, what off NAV you installed, that you already installed, only installed the server or only installed the client, and it will load as much as it can. Yeah. So instead of these 3 lines, you can simply execute this. And then there is a better object for server instances, like there is the get nav server details, server instance details. This one I like, again, a lot. You see here that it gives you much more information on the server instance. It's basically going to paste the information from the server instance and the server configuration into one object, which lets us, if you put this into a variable, you will see what I mean. Server instance, NAV skills webcast. Now, this file contains every single property or every single key that you have in your server settings config file. So I can quickly refer to the database name, which is NAV skills webcast database. I can refer to the client services. Client services, or whatever, enabled, and then it gives you a true or false. It contains functions for working with SQL a lot. So by simply invoking nav SQL referring to a server instance, the command will figure out which database it is, how to connect to that database, and then run the SQL command. It's quite easy to execute, which makes it also easy to execute, like taking a backup. This is all that's needed to take a backup. And behind the scenes, you will see it will try to figure out what the statement is needs to be, where the default backup directory is, and saves the backup there. Yeah, and obviously I've got a restore SQL backup file as well. On top of that, there are environment commandlets. So creating a new nav environment, which basically restores a backup and sets up a new nav environment with web client. The remove is going to remove as much as possible. So if you remove a multi-tenant environment, and there is a convert to NAV multi-tenant environment commandlet as well, well, it's going to delete all your tenant databases, delete the application database, delete servers, instances, and all that. As said, to improve commandlet, I've got a new NAV company, but there are also new export, import, compile commandlets, and there are things to work with the configuration as well, as I showed you. These two I really like as well, to open the Windows client. Sorry? I heard someone. Okay, but I'm going to wrap up, because I'm going to end of my presentation. Yeah, the one thing that I like a lot as well is this apply nav delta. Remember all the things that we needed in the first example to work with deltas? Well, this one combines it all in one commandlet, which is going to either apply a delta by exporting. Let me, yeah, I cannot show you that because it's a different database, but basically export the right text files, apply the deltas, import the text files again, and go update the version list and compile. And can do that with the reverse deltas as well. Okay, here's an overview of what's in there. There are scripts as well in the GitHub. You can find them, and these scripts basically going to put these modules to work. And there are some topics like there is an extension, a collection of extension scripts to create your extensions, to manage your extension development environment. Upgrade, there is a script that completely automates an upgrade environment. And you can find them on the GitHub as well. I think this kind of concludes what I wanted to show you today. Daniel? Are there questions?
Yeah, we have one question about, let me just read it. Waldo, have you maybe come across a way to export and import objects as a parallel process to speed up full database object importing and exporting?
No, only compiling.
Only compiling?
But export and import at the same time, no.
Okay.
No, I don't even think that should be that's a good idea either. I don't know. Should think about that.
Maybe from the same database, but you couldn't start like 2 or 3 commands at the same time from different server instances?
You can. You can do that. There is a how is it called again? Wait job, start job, stop job. So with start job, you can actually run a PowerShell code in background. If I remember correctly, I haven't done too much with that, to be honest.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Then another thing that was just a comment for me. So I just recently started, like last year, end of last year, to use PowerShell scripts. And I had a question, so I was trying to do comparing and doing things with extensions, and I was trying to figure out the pipeline and things like that. So I called Waldo and asked him for some help, and as I was going through it, and he's like, but I already have a function in there. So he showed me in his modules that he had already done a lot of programming in there. So I would give you a tip or advice to go into the modules and browse through the script folder and just read how those scripts are structured. And based on those, you can actually take those and modify them to your needs. So I've learned probably once I started reading the scripts in Waldo's modules, I started really learning a lot faster than what I would have been able to do myself. So that's really it. I think, I have a bunch of hellos and thank you here. Is try catch possible in PowerShell?
Yes.
Yes. Another question from Joe Mathis. Can you show how you use one script to set variables to be used in a session or another script? I think we don't have time to actually show it, but it's basically at the start of one of those scripts you see a dot and then a path to a file. That runs that file. So you can have your settings in a different file and then run those settings as part of another script. So that's how you could do that.
Yeah, and with PowerShell, by the way, you can also read very easily JSON files and stuff like that.
Yeah.
If that might help. Now, I see how to use try-catch. Well, I'm not really in favor of using try-catch. And I must admit, I don't use it too often, only if I want to suppress errors. And I usually don't want to suppress errors, because as I said, this is all not one transaction. There was no rollback or whatever. So if you want to suppress, let's not. If you automatically already want to roll back and that's why you want to catch, yeah, well then you simply do a try catch. And that is done. You can, by the way, use the Ctrl-J there as well. And there is a try catch finally and a try catch. And this is basically how you do it. And everything that's running into an error, it will catch it. And even you have these exceptions that you can do that as well. But that said, I usually don't. I let my scripts error out.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something to be said from seeing the errors. And then
Sorry?
just figure out if there's something to be said to seeing the errors and just figuring out and making your script work.
Yeah, but sometimes it does make sense, like to catch the error, or don't catch the error, I mean, or silently catch the error and then go from there. Or if there is an error that you can identify the error, then you can to already take some measures on that error.
Yeah, exactly.
Does make sense sometimes.
All right, I think those were all the questions. I'd just like to thank everyone for joining. We had at some point 64 attendees, so it was nice and busy. Hope you guys have a lot of value out of this webinar. Let us know any feedback that you have, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Waldo.
Thank you. Bye-bye.